Khenpo, Master Khenpo Sodargye. This is the second time that Khenpo is in South Africa. The first time was 3 years ago, and we had organized a lecture for him. But one day before the lecture, the university was shut down because of the protests, so we had to cancel it, and today he's back. And we had a very nice tour of campus, thanks to two of my students, Karen Farboyan and Melissa Frank. They gave us an enlightening explanation of the buildings for about 40 minutes. Thanks a lot. So what is today's talk? The topic of today's talk is about Tibetan Buddhism. So let's say in contemporary, in contemporary society. And Khenpo will talk about practices and rituals in everyday life Tibetan Buddhist. And he will introduce us to the basic ideas and conceptions and symbolic meanings and the daily practices of Tibetan Buddhism. But I will leave the space to Khenpo.
First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to our professors in the Department of Religious Studies, as well as to everyone present here. Today, we have this opportunity to come together and have a conversation. The topic is the daily practice, as well as the religious rituals of Tibetan Buddhism. The professor has introduced, back in 2015, I was also planning it in my schedule. I was preparing to arrange a lecture schedule in this department, but at that particular time they were demonstrating. The lecture simply couldn't be properly organized as expected. But 3 years later today, our paths have crossed again thanks to this opportunity. Just now we visited the university's library and memorial hall, as well as some buildings from the science department and others. In particular, the two students of the professor prepared everything with great care and attention to detail. This left a very deep impression on me. Whether it will matter in the future or not, I will record all of this. No matter where I go, I always keep a record. I've been recording what happens every day for 2 or 3 years. I haven't missed a day though. Not every day is meaningful. I make it a habit to write down something every day. I've always had it. During the visit just now, I also had a very profound and memorable feeling. Many of the impermanent changes that Buddhism talks about, or the transformations of history, or even humanity itself, throughout history, from ancient times to the present, there has been continuous progress and development. Many things have happened in various aspects. All these contribute to insight into our lives and existence. They give us a further insight. Today, I would like to give a brief introduction to Tibetan Buddhism. First of all, Tibetan Buddhism is in fact actually a branch of Buddhism. At this point, everyone present should be quite aware of this. In this world, mainly of course, there are different ways of saying this. There are mainly 5 major religions. The religions of Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, as well as Hinduism and Judaism. So as one of the 5 major religions around the world, that is Buddhism as we know it, Buddhism should have a history of 561 years up to now. The founder of Buddhism is Shakyamuni Buddha. Shakyamuni Buddha was a real person who had been to the world in India. Therefore, the Buddha's nirvana should have been in 543 BCE. It's easy to remember 543 BCE. From that time until now, Buddhism has always, without interruption, remained in this world Moreover, the teachings expounded by the Buddha are mainly categorized as the three turnings of the Dharma wheel. If we break it down in detail, there are actually 84,000 methods of Dharma. All teachings by Buddha are made into texts. Currently, according to the Tibetan Buddhist canon, as recognized, there are 108 volumes in total. The Pali canon and other versions, including the Chinese Buddhist canon, differ in number of texts due to translation variations. But all the teachings that the Buddha expounded were recorded, written. I don't need to elaborate much on this. Those of you who study religion should be very clear about that. Where the Buddha was born, where he practiced austerities, then the place where he attained enlightenment and turned the wheel of Dharma for all sentient beings. After completing all his activities, he attained parinirvana aged 80. This process, if we go to India, becomes very clear. So I won't go into detail here. If we summarize all of the Buddha's teachings, in essence, do not commit evil, do good, purify mind, the teaching of Buddhas, avoid anything harmful to human society, and do everything that is beneficial. More importantly, we must tame our minds and bring inner peace. If we sum up all Buddhist doctrine, it comes down to this. Later on, this form of Buddhism by language groups, Theravada Buddhism mainly flourished predominantly in countries such as Myanmar, Thailand, Sri Lanka, and so on. Northern Buddhism tradition, it thrived in places like China, Japan, and Korea. And then there is Tibetan Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism is in Tibet, Mongolia, in Western Europe and America. So there are three main sects of Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism actually began in Tibet, historically around approximately the year 333 AD. At that time, from the Tibetan region, the king of Tibet was the 28th king, Latotori Nyingsen. It was during that period that Buddhism gradually flourished on Tibetan soil. It continued to develop, and although there were some ups and downs along the way, up until today, right, it has been preserved intact in this world. Tibetan Buddhism, in other words, has a truly remarkable history spanning more than 1,600 years. Today, it can be found in many different countries around the world. About 10 years ago, I saw a report. Tibetan Buddhism is now widespread in more than 80 countries. But I'm not exactly sure about the most recent numbers. It should have increased even more. As Professor mentioned, people studying Tibetan Buddhism, whether in Han regions or in Western countries, is steadily growing. Whenever I visit Western countries, the question I hear most at the universities is, why are so many young people now actually studying Tibetan Buddhism? This is the question I encounter the most. I don't have a specific statistic, but it's true. Nowadays, Tibetan Buddhism in many places is popular or draws a lot of interest and seen uniquely. Although Tibetan Buddhism is internally divided into many schools, such as the Nyingma, Gelug, Sakya, Kagyu, and Jonang schools, there are few sects, but in reality, their fundamental practices and stages of cultivation are more or less the same, with no major differences over. Tibetan Buddhism includes the teachings of Northern Buddhism, doctrines now popular in Han regions and elsewhere. All of the exoteric teachings of Northern Buddhism, including texts like the Diamond Sutra and the Amitabha Sutra, are also studied. Then, as for what is taught in Southern Buddhism, including such texts as the renowned Dhammapada, the Agama Sutras, and the Vinaya Sutras, these scriptures are also studied. So, in fact, Tibetan Buddhism is not only that the practices of all the schools within Tibetan Buddhism are consistent. More importantly, the teachings of other schools are also carefully studied. Is it exactly the same as other religions or other forms of Buddhism? Actually, I think it is not the same. The main difference lies in the aspect of its sequential order. Speaking of sequence, in Buddhism, the renowned scholar Vasubandhu, in particular, who is known as the second Buddha, has a saying in the Abhidharmakosha, one who upholds discipline with hearing, contemplation, wisdom and practices diligently. That's its meaning. It is described through these four aspects. This describes practices and practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism. The first is possessing discipline. That is to say, whether you are a monastic or a layperson, anyone who wants to study and practice must uphold the basic moral and behavioral rules, whether as a layperson or monastic. Because Tibetan Buddhism is very strict, in particular when it comes to the rules and regulations about discipline. Of course, there might be individuals who may not observe the precepts well, but that is an individual's behavior. By school norms, they ask monastics observe precepts, and lay people observe the 5 lay precepts and 3 refuges. This is the foundation, truly, of all practice, just like the earth itself. Without the earth, nothing can survive. This is the first point. The second is listening carefully and learning attentively, which, as you know, is truly extremely important. If you do not truly rely on a qualified teacher, even if you're wise, it still won't work. This lineage is valued in Tibetan Buddhism. A lineage extends from the Buddha to one's own teacher. This lineage carries a certain power. This power has been continuously transmitted up to the present day. If you do not have this lineage, even if you are wise or articulate, you are not allowed or permitted to teach others. In many other religions, this kind of lineage may not be emphasized as much. This is the rigor of the lineage. Moreover, there are also certain requirements for lineage holding teachers. Teaching exoteric or esoteric, giving precepts, giving empowerments, all of these have specific qualification requirements. If one does not meet these qualifications, in principle, one is not allowed to teach others. Of course, nowadays there are few individuals who do not follow the Dharma. In principle, lineage works in this way. We can't fully rule out real and fake practitioners, but in general, up to the present day, the lineage taught by listening, receiving remains pure. It is similar to our current education system. Teachers without certificate, he can't go to work and give lectures to students. In many formal educational settings, teaching without the proper qualifications is not permitted. This is exactly the same as the way teachings are transmitted in Tibetan Buddhist monasteries. This is not something new. It has been preserved for over 1,000 years up to today. Try to observe this kind of lineage transmission in Tibet. It's good to have a detailed understanding. That's interesting. We talked about the wisdom that comes from hearing. In other words, listening is very important as a way to dispel ignorance. The third is the wisdom from contemplation, being able to discern through reflection. The knowledge you originally heard from your teacher should be reinforced. In this process, after the teacher has finished teaching you, you use various methods such as open mutual discussion, debating thoughtfully with each other, and meaningful personal reflection. Any doubts you may have, whether in front of your teacher or your fellow students, you can bring them freely doubts on Buddhism or other religions, all of these can be debated on the spot. Buddhist debate is very interesting. Today, I'll share a relatively simple example with everyone. That is to say, where I am now, debates are held quite frequently. In this kind of debate, as long as you have any doubts at all, you can express them freely, then the other party will start to respond to you. There are certain challenges when you're answering. If you're not good at responding, the other party will debate you in various ways, and they may lose the debate. In Tibetan Buddhism, it is highly encouraged to openly dispel all doubts with each other. See the short clip, which is in fact a segment from one of our debates. This is the night view from our place, but it might not be very clear under the lights. These are the monks from our institute. There are many, many ordained people. This is a khata, a ceremonial scarf, which we usually hold during practice. This is truly a landmark building in our area. This is also a scene from when we hold Dharma assemblies and practice together. This is usually during a Dharma assembly with tens of thousands of lay people present. This is my teacher, now passed away. His name was His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok. This is a photo from earliest days. This is typically during a debate session. These are ritual instruments we use during practice. These are Han Chinese students studying, and I am teaching them. This is a Dharma assembly. This is an offering of lamps. This is our night view. There were more people before, but now there are still over 5,000 monks. This is just a brief sharing from me with all of you. That is to say, among us monastics, there are debates. I see that many Western dialectical philosophies, as well as those here in Africa, many people also have this kind of dialectical and critical thinking. In fact, this is very much welcomed in Tibetan Buddhism. As long as others criticize me, if their criticism makes sense, I can accept it. Then the fourth is practice. Practice is the cause for being free from affliction. What is practice? It is what you hear from your teacher or what you contemplate on your own, and applying all of it in daily life, benefiting humanity and doing things that are good for society, and really putting into practice in real life. There are many methods of Buddhist practice, including meditation, cultivating Bodhicitta, realizing emptiness, and so on. There are many, but at the most basic level, because Tibetan Buddhism belongs to Mahayana Buddhism, if it is Mahayana Buddhism, there was once an Indian Pandita named Atisha. He said how Mahayana Buddhism differs from Shravakayana is to benefit sentient beings and cultivate bodhicitta. If that's the case, in today's Tibetan Buddhism, regardless of which school, during the process of practice, one must always be guided by altruistic bodhicitta. You may have seen many different rituals and activities, such as various Dharma assemblies in Tibetan Buddhism, but the most important thing is the truly altruistic mind. That is to say, wishing for all sentient beings to attain happiness. If this kind of mindset is lacking, then it cannot be considered true Buddhism, nor can it be called Mahayana Buddhism. So in Tibetan Buddhism, when practicing any Dharma, take refuge and generate bodhicitta. Then, throughout the practice, no matter what is practiced, including teachings on emptiness or impermanence, all of these are approached with an altruistic mind. At the end, during the dedication of merit, aspires for these actions, benefit all sentient beings without limit. So this very mind is the essence of all Buddhist teachings in Tibetan Buddhism and is within the altruistic mind. Generally, in monasteries, there are many communal Dharma assemblies and practices, but throughout the entire process, from the perspective of the mind, practice is carried out with an altruistic intention. This kind of practice is also quite difficult to find elsewhere, especially in most places. And then, is there a section here? There should be another segment to share. Let's take a look. This is the debate from earlier. Let me show it to everyone again. Actually, this should have come earlier. This is truly the real debate. Maybe when we played it just now, the order got mixed up. We should have shown the debate first, then this. There was also a debate earlier on. Actually, that debate just now is kind of like us having a fight. The actions seem rough, but at that time, all of one's doubts are expressed, and then you let the other person respond. Actually, this is quite interesting. So usually during debates, you keep thinking about it at night, wondering how you can outdo these people tomorrow. You keep preparing in every way. But sometimes you can't be too self-centered either, because in Buddhism you have to overcome the self and also help others. So sometimes there's a bit of a contradiction. That's how I really see it. If any of you want to learn more about Tibetan Buddhism, in two aspects, Tibetan Buddhism is especially unique. One is the cultivation of the Mahayana Bodhicitta. That is, for all sentient beings in the 3,000-fold world system, not only do we not harm them, but we also try every possible way to help them. There are concrete practices. In Tibetan Buddhism, these practices are very systematic and logical. Another most important aspect is through debate or through one's own methods of analysis to understand the true nature of all phenomena, because much of what we perceive is merely an illusion. This includes what I see and hear. These are not truly real or genuine. We must realize that all phenomena, ultimately, they are empty and appear like dreams or illusions. This principle is analyzed in an extremely incisive way within the Madhyamaka system of Tibetan Buddhism. So many people ask me why intellectuals and youth today are interested in Tibetan Buddhism. I answer them, first, the analysis of the view of emptiness is, in fact, extremely detailed and thorough. This is one of the main attractions. Second, there is the altruistic mindset. Studying texts like Bodhikariyavatara, Way of the Bodhisattva, one develops a truly unique and particularly distinctive, deeply nuanced understanding of bodhicitta. So for view, it is the understanding of emptiness, and for conduct, it is altruism. And these may be the main points that attract many people today. That's how I summarize it, these two aspects. Though these are not core elements of Tibetan Buddhism, some of its beautiful branches, as well as other interesting points of attraction, such as various forms of prostration, mantras recitation, and mani stones, among others, also draw people's attention nowadays. And there are meaningful symbols within Tibetan Buddhism as well. The first is prostration. Prostration is quite popular, in particular as a practice in Tibetan regions. Some people even travel thousands of kilometers, prostrating all the way from Amdo to Lhasa. Of course, this is not unique to Tibetan Buddhism. Chinese Buddhism, Master Shuyong also bowed once every 3 steps. Pilgrimages from Zhejiang to Mount Wutai, such practices exist. But in reality, some people may not know what prostration actually entails. I can briefly explain it for you. We might need to wait a bit for this part. I started late at the beginning. The 50 minutes I mentioned was counted from when I started. In fact, the purpose of prostration is to eliminate a kind of arrogance within our continuum. Each of us harbors a sense of arrogance. In Tibet, some do 3 steps and 1 prostration. In practice, this means gently making contact with the ground surface with all 4 limbs and the forehead, letting go of all sense of self and allowing the power of the earth to bless oneself. In other words, it is about dispelling our arrogance. This lets us be open and accepting of all. Within the entire natural world, it is one of the best ways to thoroughly break down our attachment to self. Of course, prostration has other merits as well. Generally, this is a widely accepted way to understand it. There is also the prayer beads in Tibetan Buddhism, which are quite special, and I'd like to mention them here. This is called the Buddha head, representing Buddha. Then each of these beads represents the Sangha, the monastic community, and the string represents the Dharma. So when we often hold prayer beads in our hands, it is a form of reverence for the 3 jewels and a reminder to us to practice. For example, my prayer beads were bought for just 3 yuan at the beginning. I bought them in 1997 and still use them now. So I'm very fond of these prayer beads as well. This represents one's own faith. It also can be seen as representing a personal hobby. It can be understood that way too. There's one more thing I'd like to introduce you to, the Mani stone piles. In Tibetan regions, you can see them everywhere, the Avalokiteshvara mantra carved on stones. Om Mani Padme Hum, this kind of inscription, for example. This has a long history. It's the heart mantra of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. This tradition has a long and rich history, as it dates back to a time that is more than 2,000 years ago. It should have been around 641 AD when Princess Wencheng entered Tibet. In Yushu, you can find these stone piles as well. And such stone piles are common throughout Tibetan regions. Actually, these Mani stone piles are extremely important. I've been there before. In a place called Chik, there is the longest Mani stone pile. It's about 2 kilometers long and is approximately 2 or 3 meters high. And when I was young, I often carved Mani stones myself. Even before I started school, I would carve them. Even now, I enjoy carving Mani stones. In my hometown, there are about 60 people or so who have been there year-round. It's been about 10 years now, since 2008. So why is this the case? Because it can dispel some of our misfortunes and evil influences. This includes places where car accidents have happened and many unfavorable places. If you carve Mani stones in such particularly special places, it has a very significant effect. For those who have passed away, carving Mani stones like this is also beneficial. For some patients, indeed, even late-stage cancer patients circumambulate Mani stone mounds. Indeed, in fact, some people have actually recovered. This power is quite miraculous. Maybe you don't believe it, but it's okay if you don't. Earlier, I mentioned that this Mani stone mound is actually quite long. It extends for quite a distance. Also, in Buddhism, there are many different rituals or some different practices. But due to time constraints, I won't elaborate further today. I had more prepared, but everyone should have a good understanding now. One last hope for everyone present today, whether teachers or students. is that we should all try to understand the various religions in the world. Because if we don't understand religion, many of humanity's mysteries may remain unsolved. That's how I see it. Some people may have religious beliefs, while others, however, may not. And among those who do, there are different religions. It is important that we should all learn to genuinely respect others. At the same time, if you're perhaps interested, studying other religions can also be very beneficial to yourself. In our world, any form of exclusion in any context is a cause of stagnation and a hinder development. Therefore, in the global village we live in, everyone should genuinely learn from one another. For teachers and students in the Department of Religious Studies, you should understand the histories, origins, and teaching of the major religions, as well as all of their teaching. If you study them, you'll find them very interesting. That's all I'd like to say at this point. Thank you all very much for your participation.